We're going to have a talk show tonight. The idea is to celebrate various people in the Scottish music industry right across 3 generations, as well as having some of the acts that have played at Wide Days or were supposed to play at Wide Days and couldn't. So that's part of the evening. And we're also here to tell you what's going to be happening at Wide Days next year. Who's been to Wide Days? Right, so there's quite a few of you who haven't. Basically, it's like this, but it's over 2 days, and there's a lot more live music, and there's a lot of different panels, and it takes place in Teviot. Have a seat. And this next year, it'll be on the 10th and 11th of April. So we're doing it in partnership with the Musicians Union, who've always been very helpful. So if you're a musician and you're not a member, join them. We've also got PPL, who've also been very helpful. Some of you might have seen Keith Harris, Stevie Wonder's manager. He generally comes up and talks on behalf of them. And we also have a university for the first time backing us, the University of the Highlands and Islands. They'll be sponsoring one of our panels. So we've got quite a few to announce. We've got the Music Publishers Association. This is important because publishers will be featured. And is there Edinburgh University Students Association, who Ray's are in the house somewhere. Yes, okay. Where are you, Ray? Hello. And then we've got the panels. So there is the publishing panel, which I've just mentioned. Singing from a different song sheet. The idea behind that is really to get people from all the different music scenes that there are in Scotland to share ideas and talk about what works in their particular sector. So we'll have someone from the folk scene, someone from the indie scene, someone from electronic, and hopefully someone that does metal as well. And last year, last year, it was only back in April, one of the big hits was something called A&R You Brave Enough, where some very brave artists submitted their records for listening to a panel of A&Rs who actually looked like they were praying. It was quite a strange spectacle. They're all kind of down like that while the music was played. We're going to be doing that again this year, but a slightly different variation. Then we've got the Indie Promoters panel as well. This is quite an interesting one. One of the questions we get asked the most is, how do we get gigs outside of our area? And these are all people that put on gigs with emerging talent and very often do a lot more than putting on gigs. So we've, for example, Fierce Pandas, a very long-standing label that tends to release singles initially by artists who then go on to become extremely famous. And we'll be adding someone to that panel as well. And then I think we've got another one, haven't we, Mikey? Presentations. This is something that we do rather than having a whole lot of people speaking. What we do with that is have one person talking about a particular subject, so you get everything you need to know squeezed into about half an hour. And one of the things that we get asked a lot is what's useful, what are the best services for promoting your music online and for releasing your music online. So we'll have a discussion about that. One of the things that in fact, most bands get wrong is actually having decent photographs, which means they tend to lose out on valuable coverage. So we'll have a presentation on what you should know about your photography and how to present yourself, and also how to upload stuff to PRS, PPL, and MCPS. People are constantly being told you have to be a PRS member, you have to register it, but it's actually quite a complicated process, or it can be a complicated process. So we'll have a practical guide to that. Bruce has already started heckling, and you've actually got a space on the sofa tonight, Bruce, so please come up. You don't actually have to heckle this evening. Please, everyone, a round of applause for Bruce Findlay. Come on there. Are you all right? So, Bruce, You are well known to many people in this room. Either you've taught them or they know the back of your head and your voice from when you sit at the front heckling. But people might not be aware of your very long career in music. And
it's quite funny because last week there was a television program on BBC4 called Joy of the Single. Don't know did any of you see it? Did you? Because I was on it, and I didn't even know. I mean, I don't even remember it being filmed. But they filmed me in 1970 in my record shop, and I had a big beard and hair. And it was great, and I was friendly. I was one of these guys that ran a record shop that smiled at customers, and I enjoyed, so I'm not having a go at Avalanche, but Jesus. And the other thing, too, is the shop was mobbed. And people were smoking and listening to his music on headphones, and I was making a fortune and laughing and joking. And then I got interviewed. And because it was called The Joy of the Single, I think I was a sort of counterpoint, because I was a singles man, it's just 3 minutes of kind of joy, and that's all right. But sometimes you just want to sit down and hear a whole album, and you get an album and it's got a mood to it, whereas singles are different mood for each single, And that was it. And then they switched to 3 guys smoking a joint, which I thought was quite good, quite appropriate. Listening to records and smoking a joint. Anyway, what were you asking?
Yeah, I mean, actually, this is something that interested me, is that could people just come in and skin up in your shop?
No, it wasn't as simple as that.
I mean, maybe that's where Kevin's going wrong with Avalanche.
Oh, absolutely. Different kind of drugs these days, No, there was none of that going on. People were smoking cigarettes in the shop. I mean, in those days, smoking was allowed everywhere, and we were all smoking. We might have had a wee joint in the back shop, mind you. But, no, there was none of that going on.
How did you end up opening a record shop?
My mum managed a record shop in Falkirk in the early 50s. So I kind of grew up with records. And I used to help out in the shop on Saturday. In fact, when I left school in 1959, my mum gave me a job in the shop in Falkirk. We travelled back and forward from Edinburgh. And although it wasn't seen as a serious job for an intelligent young man, that's why I got it, I think. I really fell in love with, but it was easy. I mean, records, Jesus, it was great. But I did try over the next 2 or 3 years to get proper work. I worked in a bank. That was crap. But I learned how to count, which was good. I worked in Saxo and shoe shop in Glasgow. I worked in a sawmill. I worked in a foundry as an office boy. I tried to join the RAF, passed all the tests and exams, and then ran away, got frightened. I did a whole bunch of shit, and then I got fed up and went on the road hitchhiking about 1962 or something, and went off. I was away for about a year and a half. Got to Morocco. Didn't get any further than Morocco. I discovered something in Morocco which was wonderful.
Which you went on to bring back to your shop.
But I was away for about a year and a half, and I worked in the farms and learned how to drive a tractor and grow sugar beet.
So did you have like a pull back towards the record shop? Was there a point where you really wanted to go back?
The thing was, I mean, what happens is, it's just like why we all get into music. You get these moments where I just call it a revolution, and there was a revolution in the UK in 1962, 63. And it was really the Beatles and the Stones. And it was a very exciting time. When I was working on a farm in the north of France, and my mum was sending me copies of NME, which used to be a good newspaper. Have you heard of NME? Well, they used to sell about 250,000 copies in those days, and it really was a Bible. And she'd send me copies of that every week, and records. And the Beatles, of course, began to really explode in 1963. So late summer 63, I hitchhiked back to Scotland. And my mum got me a job in a department store here in Edinburgh, just upstairs. It's called Patrick Thompson's, in the record department. It's now a hotel. And I very quickly became the buyer, because it was a lovely old lady, but she didn't have a clue, who the Kinks were. I mean, the Kinks were just something kinky, and the Rolling Stones and such like. So I became the buyer very quickly, and really got good at it. So much so my mum brought me back to Falkirk, and I worked for her. The boss bought a beach bar in Mallorca in the mid-60s and asked me to run it for 6 months, so I did, and gave up the record shop. But that was quite good fun. Those were kind of
Did you take music with you then?
No, I took a lot of acid though. It was
So make your own tunes, yeah.
Great. Yeah, it was the year of Revolver. Close off your mind, relax, and float downstream. Fantastic. And Mallorca was sensational. And there was a band called The Animals who were huge at the time, and they were taking a sabbatical, and they'd bought a nightclub in Mallorca, and they came and were hanging out, and they hung out at my beach bar. It was absolutely brilliant. It was great fun. And I was just blasting out the Beatles and such like over the speakers, and we were hiding American servicemen. It was good fun. The American ships were coming through the Mediterranean on the way to Vietnam, where they were. America always has these weird wars where they have to kill geeks and things, Hey, black man, kill him. Communist, fucking kill him, it was unbelievable. So you get these teenagers coming through and coming off ship for a couple of days leave before they go off to get their heads blown off in Vietnam. And they were completely convinced. They were brainwashed. American brainwashed their soldiers. But they'd hang out in our bar and we'd get them pissed and smoke a joint with them and things and some of this. And get talking to them and ban the bomb, stop the war. And it's great because some of them jumped ship and I used to hide them. And the American MPs used to come down looking for these lost sailors. And the ship had to sail, it was off. So we managed to hide two in particular, a guy called, I can't remember, one guy was called Lance.
So I was imagining this kind of allo type of scenario.
He was very like that, and
with Spanish accents.
The funny thing about being there at the time was just, I was young. I was 23 or 22 or so, 1966, 22 years of age. I was a kid. But I thought I was the centre of the universe. Chaz Chandler, the guy from The Animals, the bass player, he went off to America, said, I'm going to do some business. I'm going to digress and do different things within the band. And he came back a week later and said, I've discovered this guitarist guy. I'm bringing him back to England. He plays guitar with his teeth. Black guy, but he loves the Beatles and Bob Dylan, and his music's sensational. His name's Jimi Hendrix. It's fucking great. He sounds wonderful, and right enough, he was wonderful. And the following year, I came back to Britain later that year, fell out with my boss in Falkirk, ran off to London, got a job in a record shop in London, and was hanging out in clubs with my friend Chaz Chandler and such like. And it was great because I got married. We got pregnant, so we thought we should get married. And we got married, and my wedding present was tickets for two at the Savile, Jimi Hendrix. The day he played, he opened the concert with Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which wasn't out for another 2 or 3 weeks. And the Beatles were in one box and the Stones were in another, and I was in the second row on Jimmy's guest list, sitting next to Terence Stamp and Julie Christie. At least that's how I remember it. Maybe it was the drugs. Anyway, so that was my introduction to the scene. And then I got serious. A baby being born in London. London was great, but it wasn't that good. And so back to Scotland, back to Falkirk. Brother was pissed off with his job. He was in hi-fi, and he said, look, I had to start a record shop. Will you help me? I said, sure. And we opened our first shop in Falkirk.
And when you opened that shop, and presumably if you just had a kid, surely opening your own shop is not exactly the most secure
sensible.
Thing
No,
to be
but
doing.
I had my day job was my mum again. My mum was a great lady. She died that year, as it happens, very sadly. But she got me a job in Stirling, which wasn't far from Falkirk, so I was travelling back and forward in a record department in a big store called Graham and Morton, posh shop, and it's gone now, Great King Street. So actually it was good because 1967 was the year that Stirling University opened up. A big campus, so I don't know how many, 10, 15,000 students, all young hippies, and Stirling's a pretty square town. But this record shop, which is a pretty square, it was like Jenner's kind of shop. But the record department was brilliant. And it was, it was a time when Joni Mitchell was just coming out, and Grateful Dead, and the Fugs, and Frank Zappa, and I was stocking all this stuff. I mean, the people in the shop didn't want what I was doing, but the students did. And so we were very successful. So I had the day job, and I just helped my brother at night times and weekends. And the shop was a huge success. And I had made all my contacts, having been in London for a year, working in record shops in London. And so we specialised in American imports. In those days, the worldwide release of records was not like it is now. It's so manufactured now. But in those days, records would come out in America, And artists were making albums rather than singles in albums. If you know, certain artists were the kind of artists I liked, Neil Young and such like, and they wouldn't get released for maybe up to 4 and 5, 6 months.
So how did you find out about them in this country then?
Well, because when I worked in London, you know, there was a magazine called IT, International Times, which is a sort of underground magazine. There was a guy called Simon Stable, did the, well, that was his nickname. He did the pop or the music column in International Times, and he worked for me in my record shop. He worked on the Saturdays, and we became pals. And he was just a really hip guy. And he knew what was coming out in America all the time. He used to write about it, and we used to get it imported, made contacts with American distributors.
What was the process behind this? I mean, I was thinking about this last night, and now you've got the internet. It's, you know, in the past you had magazines that would maybe, I guess, Record Collector or Music Week, they would tell you what was coming out.
Well, Music Week was not very good. It was called Record Retailer in those days, and it was pretty conventional. And it told you all the British releases that were coming out, and it was a record retailer's magazine, and it wasn't hip. What was hip was Rolling Stone magazine, and International Times and Oz. These were good times because we had a mainstream, which we always have, and we had a very definite underground, and I was very much part of that. I liked the whole underground thing, and it was a multicultural thing. I mean, people that were in movies, theatre, film, dance, music, painters, were all part of a kind of scene. So there's a real fantastic bohemian kind of mixture, which I absolutely loved. And I wanted to fuck the establishment anyway. So records and selling the kind of records we were selling was brilliant. And when we got bussed for selling, my brother was the one that got charged, mind you, because the shop wasn't his name, but we got bussed for selling Oz in Glasgow, a couple of years later, because it said communist or something, something stupid thing. I mean, no, I kid you not. I mean, there were serious, silly restrictions then about what you could say and what you couldn't say. And you couldn't say shite. And John Lennon's record got banned, Christ, you know it ain't easy. They're going to crucify me. And that was banned because he said Christ. It was sacrilege. And now everyone's going, fuck, cunt, bugger, shite, damn hell. And it doesn't matter, after 9 o'clock. Sorry, what time is it?
So was the record shop actually called Bruce's then?
No, the first shop was called Brian Findlay's in Falkirk. And it became I'll tell you what was fabulous.
Right, so is Brian your brother?
Brian's my brother, my big brother.
Right, so at which point did little brother take the name over, and when did it go from Brian to Bruce?
Quite straightforward. It was called Brian Findlay's. As I say, he's my big brother. The very first day we opened, I worked in the shop. I had a day off, or I took a day off from my shop, and it was brilliant. And my very first customer, or the two guys came in, breathless teenagers from Edinburgh, off the train, 9 o'clock in the morning, straight into the shop. They heard about us opening. They'd read about us in International Times. There's a guy called Brian Hogg and Stuart Cruikshank. And Stuart Cruikshank, a lot of you won't, you'll know who Stuart is, Vic. Stuart Cruikshank's a legend. Stuart went on to be the main man at the BBC in Scotland here, radio, and really developed all the programmes like that we get now. We wouldn't have a Vic Galloway show and an Ally McCrae show and stuff like that if it wasn't for Stuart Cruikshank. He's a legend. And he was my first customer. And he and Brian Hogg came bursting into the shop, breathless. They were still at school, Heriots, nice posh boys they were. And that was the beginning of a flood of people coming from Edinburgh and Glasgow to Falkirk to buy records, because there was nothing like this shop in these cities. So I joined my brother very quickly, left the shop in Stirling, joined Brian full-time. Within a few months, it was bursting at the seams. It was a tiny wee shop. We were doing so well, particularly on, in those days, students got grants. And in Student Grants Day, it was brilliant. We'd just do fantastic business because the students came flooding in, buying all this underground records. So we thought, we've got to expand. And Edinburgh is where we came from originally, and I was born and brought up in Edinburgh. So let's open a second shop in Edinburgh. And so when we decided to open it, we found it in Rose Street, found it in late 68. Didn't get open till early 1969. And I said to Brian, look, we've got Brian's in Falkirk. Can we call this one Bruce's? And I'll go and run it. So we called it Bruce's. And I came up with this wee slogan, I found it at Bruce's. And I had a red crimson bag, really bright red, paper bag. They ultimately went into polythene or whatever. but originally they were paper. They looked fucking great. And it just said, I found it at Bruce's, in a tiny wee print record shop. And it worked a treat. It was a sensation. The shop really took off. It was in 79 Rose Street. And that's the one that was on the telly last week. And it was fun, but I loved it. Absolutely. It's the best time of my life was working in retail. And I felt like they were the centre of the universe. And we immediately ingratiated ourselves into the Edinburgh scene. And very quickly opened one in Glasgow, number 1 Sauchiehall Street. And then in Kirkcaldy, and then in Perth, and then in Stirling.
I mean, the idea of that, just all the, now there's loads of places that don't have a record shop at all.
I know, it's sad.
And you're talking about shops in small Scottish towns. How many outlets did you have?
We ultimately had, I think it was 13. I lost count. It was interesting because what happened was we did do very well, but we were kind of unique for a year or a couple of years. And then that whippersnapper Branson started up in London. And it's interesting. I mean, we're quite good pals actually, Richard and I, and he admits it. Simon Draper, who became his partner, Simon Draper was born and brought up in South Africa, and he used to buy records from my shop in South Africa. We did mail order. We used to do a single column-inch ad in Disc, which is a music paper. And we got orders from all over the world. In fact, I used to send Captain Beefheart records back to America. Midwest America couldn't get Captain Beefheart records, so I'd import them from America and then send them back. Coast to Newcastle, So, they look like they're having fun. Yeah, it was great. It was great fun. And the thing about, what was I saying? What were you asking?
About the number of outlets that you had.
Well, number of that was the only problem was we were so good, we began to expand. And that wasn't the idea. We were going to have Brian and Bruce, and that was it. But we expanded, and I think if we'd stopped at 4, it would have been great. The Kirkcaldy shop was fabulous. The first Glasgow shop was good. But we kept expanding. And it's amazing, you move from being behind the counter to an office, and you're beginning to buy bulk. Virgin moved into Scotland 3 or 4 years later. Another shop in Glasgow started up, very similar to us, called Listen. Another shop in Edinburgh started called The Other Record Shop. And so there suddenly was a proliferation of indie record shops, very similar to our own. So we started being unique. In those days, in the very early part of our business, records were sold at a fixed price. There was a thing called resale price maintenance. And that was abolished, which meant there was a free-for-all. So there became a price, and records, in other words, sold at a particular price. Singles, it was a great price in those days, were 6 and 8 pence, having gone up from much lower. But 6 and 8 pence, none of you'll understand pound, shillings and pence, but 6 and 8 pence multiplied by 3 is £1. So you buy 3 singles for £1. But records, so the best record shops are the ones that had the best stock, not the ones with the best price or the lowest price. The minute the price war started, of course, you get into a price war. So bulk was everything. And we very nearly went bankrupt.
When was this then?
In the early 70s, price maintenance was lost.
So at which point did you actually wind up Bruce's?
Well, Bruce's, what happened was in the 1976, 77, we were very close to bankruptcy. And Guinness, the drinks company, made an offer to take us over. And so they bought into the company. My brother and I retained 15% each, or 18%, something like that, shares, and retained our titles as joint managing directors. The shop stayed as Bruce's, but they were bastards. But
did
they took us over.
Did you get free beer?
Do you know what? I hate Guinness. I think it's a shite drink.
Didn't they own distilleries though as well?
They did. They ultimately bought out fucking Scotch whiskey, didn't they? Saunders was a cunt. But I didn't like them. I didn't like them at all. But fortunately, 1976 was also the year when Anarchy in the UK came out. And I was talking about a musical revolution in 62, 63 with the Beatles and the Stones. The next revolution, then there was the underground thing, which I obviously made my living and my career out of. But the next revolution was punk.
What was that like for you? I mean, you've been an old hippie.
Oh, yeah, well, I never saw myself as a hippie. I always saw myself as a sort of cool beatnik sort of guy. Hippies were like Hippies were a sort of fashion thing, you know. People with long hair and beards. And, you know, hey man. And people call you dude and things like that, you know. And I'm more of a Jack Kerouac man. So when the great thing about punk was not actually the music, because most of it was pretty shit, apart from the Clash, but was the attitude, the whole do-it-yourself ethos. It was a whole new beginning. Now, I mean, Christ, I could sit here all night. But 1974, 75, Island Records, who were my favourite record label, said to me, Bruce, you keep recommending people to us. You recommended this band, the Humble Bums, Billy Connolly and Jerry Rafferty. We thought they were shit. They've both gone on to sell lots of records. You recommended that guy, Alan Gorrie, and his band. They're now the Average White Band, and they've gone on to make millions. I mean, you seem to have ears. You can see things in Scotland. Why don't you start a record label? I said, because I couldn't afford it. It cost millions. I know I've got a successful chain of record shops, but that's way beyond me. No, we'll help fund you. We've helped Virgin Records, we'll help Chrysalis, Charisma, all these labels. You'd be great. You'd be our Scottish guy, you know. As long as I'm not your A&R man. So I went out and found a band called Café Jacques, Edinburgh band, and I liked them a lot. They were very funky, sophisticated, and this is pre-punk, but coming up to the punk period. And Island came along and saw them and said, nah, we don't like them. I said, no, fuck you. You never liked anyone I like. You know, the whole point is that you're going to back me. It's my taste, not your taste. I'm not going to be an A&R scout. Fuck you. Fuck off. And I'd fallen in love with the band, and you can't treat bands like cans of beans. They're people, they're human beings. I was shagging them, you know. I mean, I was in love with them. I loved them. They were great. Actually, I wasn't shagging. They were posh kids. But I liked them so much, so I went off. I said, I'll just fucking manage you then. I don't know what a manager does, but I just went off knocking on record shops. I was a really famous record retailer. I was 30 years of age or something, 32, 33 years of age for this time. I was mature, sophisticated, successful. And so I thought I'd get taken seriously. But I think I had a big neon sign on my head saying, mug. You know, being a manager and working with A&R, which I didn't understand, is a completely different ballgame from working with the sales and marketing people. But anyway, I got a deal with CBS Records, Columbia. And we made an album called Round the Back. I'm on the cover. Picture of me and the band. It's a great album, brilliant album, but it came out in 1976, the same time as the same record label signed The Clash. And this band, you know, it was really sophisticated, funky, Robert Palmery, Average White Bandy stuff. And it just sounded so dated to, I am an antichrist. You know, it just didn't sound right. You know, ain't no love in the heart of the city. You know, it was buried. It completely died the death. So I continued to manage them for another year, and then we kind of split, and they got another manager. The record label idea got resurrected, all because of Stiff. Now, Stiff Records, I mean, they had The Damned, Elvis Costello, Ian Dury and the Blockheads. They were a great label. Jake Riviera, I used to drive up and down to London and buy records from them and drive back up to Edinburgh. And I got to know, and I loved, they had a slogan, which was, I mean, it was even better than I found it at Bruce's. Theirs was, if it ain't stiff, it ain't worth a fuck. Which I thought was quite good. I just thought they were great. And I was talking to Jake about making records. He said, it cost a few £100 to make a single. Just get to the studio, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. So I went off and found a band. And I found a band called Sale from Edinburgh. And I said, what a stupid name. Why are you called Sale? They said, well, in January, every shop in town's got sale in the window. Well, that's a crap idea, you know. You call yourselves Bus Stop or fucking Jesus or I don't know, you know, I mean. So I said, think of something like, you're a garage band. Think of something to do with engines, car, I don't know. So they came back, the valves. I said, the valves? That's what you put in television sets. No, you get valves in the engine. I said, okay, the valves. And they made a single called For Adolphs Only, which I produced. I'm walking down. Produced it? Yeah, well, I produced it. I went to the studio. I called myself, it's on the label, produced Bruce Findlay. I just went in and said, come on, go, right, and then, right, and vibed them up. It's great lyrics. Walking down the Autostrada all shagged out. I don't want to be just another damn crowd. Adolf was a piss artist. Okay. Fantastic. 15,000 copies I sold of that. So I just jumped in my car. I had a bunch of record shops, so at least half of them sold through my shops, but the other half I took down to London. There was a new company called Rough Trade just started up in London doing distribution, and I gave them to them. They sold up 1,000 copies for me, distributed it around London shops. I took it to places like Kings Lynn, Manchester, Birmingham. It was a brilliant, and it was a great vibe, and a real camaraderie between indie record shops. And I had this picture in my mind that every record shop should start a record label. I mean, within a week of releasing this record, a band called the Skids came in to see me from Dunfermline. Ricky Jobson and Stuart Adamson came into the shop on Rose Street and said, Bruce, listen to our demo. And I listened to this, like, John's got a job in a factory. It was a great record. Into the Valley.
So why didn't you sign them?
Because I just released one single. I didn't have enough money to do it. I said, look, why don't you go to Sandy Muir? There's a record shop in Dunfermline. See if he'll sign you and do the record. I'm just nervous that I hadn't sold 15,000 copies of the Valves at this time. It was a few weeks later. It took weeks. But I encouraged him, and I said, get Sandy to call. Sandy called me up and said, you serious? Do you think I should release it? I said, yeah, it doesn't cost much to do it. I'll tell you what, I will order 500 copies from my shops now. Commitment. I'll give you a check, a post-dated check. That's how serious I am. I think they're fucking great. I think they will work. There's a revolution happening. EMI are fucked. Warner Brothers are fucked. We're going to have independent record shops in every town in the country. And I genuinely had this vision. And I wanted every record shop to start a record label. And that's how it should be, you know. I still think that today, by the way. And Sandy did. Called it No Bad Records. I did get my 500. I think I ended up selling 2,000 or 3,000 copies of the record. Sandy made a bit of money. Ultimately signed to Virgin. Skids moved to London and fucked up. Well,
and at which point did you then get involved with Simple Minds? So I'm going to try and fast forward you a bit so that we can get Nicola on as well.
Within another year, within a year, Simple Minds came through to see me in Edinburgh at my shop, my office. Jim wasn't a guy called Ian Cranagh who was at Edinburgh University, liked them and was kind of vaguely looking after them. He'd said, look, you should go and speak to Bruce. He seems to know everyone and he's a good guy. And I had a little fanzine by this time called Cripes. It's a newsletter for Bruce's, which I used to do an editorial for. And, so we were good to know. And I had the chain of shops, of course, still. So Jim Kerr came through to see me. He's 19 and a wee pudding bowl haircut and mascara. Skinny, believe it or not. I'm not saying he's fat now, but he's a wee bit chubby. But I don't mean to bitch. But he looked fucking great. And he was a Ouija. I mean, a Ouija with eye makeup on and lived to tell the tale. I thought, this guy has to be cool. You know, he can walk down the street looking like that. He looked like a sort of priest. You know, he had a wee funny hat and a long coat and mascara. He looked great. I just liked the way he looked for a start. Gave me the demo, 5-track demo. I remember it to this day, and I listened to everything. I just thought, this is it. It's the best thing I'd ever heard in my life. I loved it. And I said, but you're an album band. You know, this is 1978. You know, punk's been going for 2 years. You're an album band. You're serious. I don't think I could sign you. And what happened was, I was between wives at the time. My wife had left me. And so I was kind of a bachelor. So I essentially moved to Glasgow for the next few months and just hung out with the guys, crashed out on Jim Kerr's couch, his mum's couch, and just hung out with them and discussed the revolution and taking over the world and everything. And I managed to get a deal. I had a license deal with Arista Records, who are a shite record label, but they were a major. And I had a license deal with them, and they wanted to sign Simple Minds. I said, they're not going to sign with you. You're fucking Barry Manilow and Shawaddy Waddy, fuck off. And they said, yeah, but we've got Patti Smith and Lou Reed. So I said, and Iggy Pop. And they said, yeah, but you're not selling any records of theirs. You're no good at selling them. Your image is all wrong. And I think, on the other hand, my image is great. Zoom. If you give me the money, you know. So it was a sort of pre-creation. I mean, Alan McGee got it right with Creation and CBS. So anyway, they gave me the money to sign Simple Minds. And I signed up to Zoom. It's got a big deal, and I negotiated it for the band. Didn't take any commission or anything. But it was enough money to put them on wages, make an album, enough money to tour. So what we did was we made 3 albums in 2 years. Sold quite a lot, but not the way we should have been selling. I mean, they made, particularly the second and third album, were absolutely, in my opinion, brilliant albums. And they were really developing a big cult reputation. But we weren't selling, and there were other guys coming through like Gary Newman and, I don't know, Spandau Ballet and Duran Duran, and we weren't happening. And so I managed to talk our way out of the Arista deal. It was a 3-album deal, and they wanted to re-sign them, but they were iffy about it. So I managed to talk them out of it, and I signed them to Virgin, and the rest is history.
So I think that's quite a good point to bring Nicola in, because this is around about the time that you'd have been getting into music. So please, a round of applause for Nicola.
Stance with the mic like this.
Oh, is that quite good?
Yeah,
oh, right. Is there only? Is there?
It's quite a relaxed.
Is there another? I think there's another microphone over there, Bruce, so you can interject. You could go back to heckling if you want. So we've got this point where Simple Minds are about to explode, and I imagine that'll have been round about the time where you first started getting interested in music, Nicola. I mean, was there a sort of first kind of phase for you were there any particular records that you really got into?
Yeah. I would say probably whenever Vic's going to laugh at this, whenever Anika released Japanese Boy, which I think was 1981 or 1982, and for most of you who won't know what that was, it was a Scottish faux oriental disco record by a folk singer in disguise. But for a kind of 5-year-old, it was the most amazing thing that I'd ever heard in my life. So that was the first single that I ever bought. And I think that did kind of start a bit of a fixation with the physical kind of product as much as with records, because I became fixated with the little rainbow that was on the label and everything. So that's kind of when it started. So we're talking 81, 82, and I would have been about 5, maybe 6, something like that. So, and I was very aware of Simple Minds by the mid-80s because I had a stepbrother who was idolised them, and they were still a very kind of cool Scottish band. But I think the important thing about a Scottish band being successful at that time was, if you grew up here, it gave you a bit of a sense of ownership and a bit of a sense of kind of proximity to things that otherwise were happening in America or were happening elsewhere. So maybe that made everything a bit more possible for people who want to get into
one of the
music.
things about the early 80s and a Scottish band succeeding, and there's no doubt we were one of the first, if you like, but we weren't just a Scottish band succeeding. There are lots of Scottish bands succeeded before Simple Minds, but we're one of the first Scottish bands to succeed from Scotland and stayed in Scotland.
Yeah.
Made it from Scotland.
Did you remember, did you ever bump into them or see them out and about?
What, Anika?
Simple Minds.
God, no.
Was she from
there was
Glasgow?
An expose. It was awful. I remember being at nursery or something, and the Daily Record did an expose on her. An expose her as
she wasn't
this folk
really
singer.
Japanese, yeah.
I mean, it was a bit obvious because the B-side to Japanese Boy was A Fond Kiss, which is obviously a Burns song. I should have known, but I was a kid. I was just blown away by it. Was like Toya to me, or I don't know. There was that massive early 80s pop fascination with the Orient and that, probably quite, almost faintly racist way now, but at the time we just bought it wholesale, and someone somewhere thought Anika with this bogus pentatonic scale could make a hit, and it worked. It was number one.
It is a great song, by the way.
It was like number one hit.
I have this on, just to reveal something, I have this on my playlist for when we go through to DJ in Glasgow in February, because we're just going to do Scottish stuff, and that's going to be there. Can you remember Kelly Marie as well? That was another one of these kind of faux disco Scottish things. Check it out. It's quite amazing. But anyway, going back to the 80s, I mean, you're saying that there were these acts that you could actually relate to. And I think that period in the mid-80s, some of the biggest bands in Europe or even the world were actually Scottish. I mean, how much did that make a difference to you in terms of your interest in music?
Made every difference to me, and especially, oh God, I've banged on about it enough in the paper this year, but especially in about 1987, so I was still at primary school and still had that kind of sense that everything happened in America and not in Stirling. We have the Stirling connection, Bruce. It's a Forth Valley thing. And Top of the Pops was on, and Deacon Blue came on, and I loved the song, and then I found out that they were a Scottish band, and that honestly changed my understanding of everything in terms of, because they were like a few miles down the road, and that had a massive impact on, I guess, psychologically they thought that maybe it was possible to do things or be involved, and that you didn't need to be in the States or know everyone in London.
And I mean, did you start going to gigs at quite an early age as well?
I don't really. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'd say by the time I was in the early years of high school, I was like blagging my way into a lot of gigs, all by Scottish bands. Like, I'd say by the time I was 15, I would get into gigs by like doing the art, like painting drum skins for the Kevin McDermott Orchestra, or doing posters for the Silence, anything to kind of get in. And because I was underage, so I had to do it through the...
I think this is an interesting thing that, really dawned on me, and it came up in a discussion we had in the Parliament, actually, a few months ago. And it's just the access to music, or being able to see touring bands. And it strikes me that it's much harder now if you're under 18 to go and see music. I mean, is this something that you're aware of? I mean, do you think that if you hadn't been able to sneak into those gigs, your kind of your musical life might have turned out different?
I don't think so. I think I just would have sneaked into them. I think you've got to, there's got to be the drive to see things, and where there's a will, there's a way, sort of thing. So, not really, no. I think you would just find some other means of getting to see something if you want to.
Bands that haven't hit records tend to be doing concerts, so young people can get into them. It's the new bands on the way up, if you want to go and see the OK Social Club or whatever, Stagger Rats and things like that, the Phantom Band, they're playing licensed premises. So until you reach that concert level, it is difficult for under 12-year-olds to get in.
What was it like in your day, Bruce? I mean, did you
never
did
saw
you have
anyone.
concert halls, or what? How did it work?
The first bands the first gig I ever went to was the London Palladium, again with my mummy. When I saw Alma Cogan and Winifred Atwell.
My mum took me and my brother to see Gary Newman when I was 12.
But that's pretty cool. I mean, Winifred Atwell was a pianist. The first gig I went to on my own was the Usher Hall. I saw Frankie Vaughan in the mid-70s. But the first sort of rock and roll gig was it was Roy Orbison in Glasgow, and then Gene Vincent and Eddie Cochran the week before Eddie Cochran was killed, sadly. And that was fucking great. I saw a lot of gigs. When I worked in a foundry in Bonnybridge, and one of the guys there was really hip, and he got tickets for gigs at the Empire, I think it was called, in Glasgow, theatre. And again, it's a theatre, so it didn't matter what age I was, 15, 16 or something. So I'm going to see these rock and roll bands, American visiting artists, who would play in a package. You used to get 3 or 4 bands in the one bill, Dwayne Eddy, Eddie Cochran, Gene Vincent. I saw Buddy Holly and the Crickets in London. I saw quite a lot of stuff, but there were concerts, and I was young. I was underage. It wasn't licensed. The first real proper fucking great, me being an independent, drug-taking, weed, stupid, nerdy guy, was the Alex Harvey Big Soul Band playing the Place in Edinburgh in 1963 or something. I was 19. That was cool. And that was the first Scottish...
God, is that what's now Espionage?
Yeah, it was the best.
Right, try.
It was the best club in Edinburgh.
That was incredibly cool.
It was
and
really
that's
cool.
Now Espionage.
It was really cool.
Oh, how times have changed.
And the great thing then is all the best bands were in Glasgow. There were 2 bands from Glasgow, the Alex Harvey Big Soul Band and a band called the Blues Council, and they used to come through at weekends and play the Place. And it was fantastic. And I
saw Primal Screaming there, actually.
Did you?
1986.
Wow.
Yeah. So it did come to by Edinburgh standards. The Place did last quite long as a venue.
It did.
Espionage?
Yeah.
Well, it's now Espionage.
It was the Mission, yeah.
Yeah, it was the Mission before that.
I saw the Scooby-Doo Orchestra. I think I saw the Cartoon Heroes in the Mission, actually, back in the day. Yeah.
Well, now we've got the Liquid Rooms, I suppose. It's just down the hill a wee bit. So. But yeah, I think the minute you've got clubs, you really have to be. You've got to look 18 at least if you're not 18, So it's harder in that sense. So as I say, all my early concerts were concerts. All my experiences of rock and roll.
Did you have a point? I mean, Bruce, I guess, was working for his mum already, so there was already that inclination. Did you have a point where you decided you really wanted to work in music?
I honestly don't think I ever thought about it. As I say, I got to spend, even when I was at school, I remember getting sent home, suspended, expelled, whatever you want to call it, for postering the corridors, using the office photocopier to photocopy posters of bands who were playing in kind of dodgy venues in Stirling and plastering them up in the walls. So I think I'd always kind of done it without thinking. So after school, I did a journalism course, but I didn't know how to get into journalism, which is music journalism, which is what I wanted to do. So I just kind of went to London with a guy I was going out with at the time, and we moved into a flat above a hairdresser's in Ladbroke Grove, a barber's. A crack den it actually transpired to be, but it seemed to be a barber.
How convenient.
Wasn't it?
If Bruce hadn't have been busy, he'd probably been managing that shop,
Mo Better Cuts, it was called, with a K. Anyway, I went in there and just said to them, have you got any, where might I get a job? And they sent me to some kind of, literally like a little shop which had an advert in the window, and it just said Happy Hardcore Office. So
hang on, you asked the local crack dealers if they could give you a
job?
Wow.
Yeah. Well, we were living there. It was like, I didn't know anyone, so I kind of said, where do you go to find jobs in London? I'm interested in music. They said, there's the Chelsea and Kensington job office or something like that, which was just a local job office. And if you didn't want to be a barber, I suppose, you could work in, the area we lived in London, unbeknownst to me,
was Happy Hardcore a shop, yeah?
Nah, they needed someone to import it. And I think because I was Scottish. And
of course, yeah.
We're talking about 1996, 1997. So I just went in and they were just like Fubar, Resurrection, I
just
knew nothing.
The younger or foreign audience members, this is important to explain this. There was a genre called Happy Hardcore, which was about 200 beeps per minute, and it would have strange high-pitched Smurf voices over the top. There's elements of it in Scooter, if any of you are familiar with Scooter.
That's the classy end of it. Scooter's like the kind of Scooter's the serious end of Happy Hardcore.
And one of the there were various pockets of this. So you had Salt Coats, or that was it Hangar 13 or something, where
Hangar 13.
People couldn't just take one pill; they'd have to take a handful, and then surprisingly enough, many of them died.
I didn't. I just knew about kind of alternative music and rock music, but my wee brother, thank God, was totally into Happy Hardcore, and I was Scottish, and they needed someone to basically run this office. I was 20 or something, so I was like, I know everything. I know about, because you've got these Fractal videos, and I knew DJ Paul Elstak, who was this kind of Rotterdam was the epicenter of Happy Hardcore in the world. So anyway. Yeah, I started importing Happy Hardcore records.
So you went from Happy Hardcore to working at Mute Records?
Yeah. That's exactly
seems
how it happened.
Quite a curious transition. Mute Records, home of Depeche Mode, Moby, all sorts of Nick Cave, lots of credible and world-famous artists. Yeah. How did you make that leap?
Well, it's a bit of sort of bullshit, I suppose. I don't know. I kind of, when the Happy Hardcore label was run by this guy or owned by this guy in Holland, a man called Hein van der Rey. Did you ever come across him? He ran Epitaph, the punk label. Yeah. And he also had a publishing company, which sort of survived on the publishing rights to a song called Venus by Shocking Blue and the back catalogue of an 80s band called Living in a Box. So
that guy, the main guy from Living in a Box,
Marcus
got thrown in
Weir.
jail for being part of some big VAT carousel, didn't he?
Yeah, well, obviously I can't pass comment on that.
Yeah. I figured he might, it was maybe being punished for the wrong thing. Maybe he should have just been punished for living in a box.
Yeah, probably.
Sorry, anyway.
I don't know. It was a weird place that I ran for a while. So I kind of learned about publishing. I kind of learned about dance music. I learned about punk because I kind of by default ended up, sort of looking after a lot of the Epitaph or overseeing the Epitaph stuff for the UK. And on top of that, I persuaded him that we should put out an album by a Scottish DIY Glasgow band called Swelling Meg, who were fronted by Cora Bissett, who just did the Whatever Gets You Through the Night album. And she's now a well-known theatre director. So for all I was doing all of that, my eye was still back here. So because I'd kind of been involved with that DIY thing as well, I think that helped with Mute to an extent. And I just had lots of experience.
So what, you just asked Mute for a job and they...
No, they advertised for a press and marketing officer, and I went through all the... I had to go into a boardroom and do a big presentation, blah, blah. I don't know, I got interviewed a few times and they seemed to... I loved Mute, and I don't know, they seemed to like my ideas and let me join.
The thing about this business is if you're enthusiastic and genuine, if you're honest...
Yeah.
There's enthusiasm for you, Bruce.
I get this reaction every time I speak. It's amazing. No, if you're really enthusiastic, it's not a fucking rocket science business.
Yeah, totally.
You know, you're passionate and you know your stuff. You will get a job. You will get work in this business. It's not to do with the qualifications on a bit of paper. It's the way you talk at interview.
Totally. And I think if you've been seen...
I mean, I don't think it's such an illogical switch from going where you were to Mute. I mean, there's still an attitude of independence and revolution.
Yeah.
Well, actually, come to think of it, Moby's first early stuff was happy hardcore, wasn't it?
Actually,
So there is quite a logical
That's
progression.
Right. He was
there.
like a big rave guy, wasn't he?
Yeah,
so,
he used to. I remember going to see him in Edinburgh Castle one Hogmanay.
Oh God, I was there.
All these total Rajas appeared.
Yeah, that was probably me.
They'd all be like, "Did you used to go to Paradox?" And they'd be like, "No." I went to Tattoo, but it was. There's a lot of that.
I thought it was a good gig, though.
Yeah, it was.
Were you
Even though
there
it
as well?
smoked.
I was there.
Fucking
we were all
Baltic.
there.
Somebody gave me an aspirin before. At least they told me it was an aspirin. But all I remember is loving everyone.
And your headache was gone, Right.
Fabulous.
So
I love it.
I think we're going to take a little break. After the break, Panda Sue are going to come on and do a couple of songs. I'll introduce them, but you probably need to go to the toilet or go and smoke. Now, where we got to just before the interval, it was you going from happy hardcore to working at Mute.
Yeah.
And then you find yourself on tour with Nick Cave, is that right?
I did, yeah. Well, I mean, basically all the Mute artists, that was kind of my job, was to tour with them. So whether that was, Nick Cave or Erasure or Depeche Mode or Go Frap or whatever, So I would find myself on tour with the Bad Seeds as well, not just Nick Cave.
Oh, they've got those amazing beards and stuff, haven't they? Yeah.
They look as cool at breakfast as they do at,
And I mean,
at sundown.
Were there any acts that were particularly interesting to work with? I mean, you've gone from happy hardcore and some punk stuff to suddenly touring with people like the Bad Seeds. What was it?
Yeah, they were. I mean, I think you can tell by certain bands' kind of aesthetics and spin-offs that they are just really interesting characters and artists. And Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds are definitely within that realm. Very sort of personable, but also just super, super kind of focused and talented and bizarre, which are all the best traits.
Do they have any strange habits, or do you find yourself, having to pander for any particular quirks and stuff?
Yeah. I'm legally bound not to speak about most of them.
What, did you sign some sort of agreement when you left? Fucking hell, if I'd known that, I've never got you on the panel,
the ones that I can't,
Be a bit indiscreet. I mean, which ones are you not bound by, or, I mean...
Do you know that way at the time, you think, why am I signing this? It's only about, getting arrested with prostitutes or...
Was that with
You
Moby?
don't have to
I
sign
can't
things.
possibly...
You don't have to sign anything.
Right, I bet it was with Moby.
You should be discreet.
Don't believe all the Christian hype.
Olaf, you always want to know the dirt.
I know.
They just do the same as
it's
you. They
kind
take
of-
drugs and they shag and they fuck about a bit.
I did find it quite bizarre, but I suppose when the police are involved, it's a different matter because it's like there are legalities. Do they have any odd habits? Not nearly as many as you kind of expect. They're totally, mainly normal people, and that's maybe totally normal. But bearing in mind, I worked with Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds and Depeche Mode post Smack, which is important. Do you know what? To such an extent that actually we were once in Dublin and Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds tour bus had, in fairness, just blown up. And he actually took me aside and told me to curb my drinking because he thought I was...
Jesus. You could say the girl out of Scotland,
Yeah.
Wow.
He thought I hadn't blown up their tour bus, just to clarify that for the police, if there's any police watching. But yeah, he was like he was quite pious by that point because he was clean, you know. It's like...
Bruce, I mean, you kind of lived in the 70s, 80s and still active in the music business in the 90s. I mean, were you know, was that Beastie Boys where they're talking about their own manager being the most hardcore and sitting in the back of the bus? I mean,
I must admit, I used to go to bed after any of the bands I ever managed and was up before them in the morning.
Yeah.
Smiling.
I would honestly argue.
How do you fucking do that, man? How come you look so happy, you know?
How did you do
I think that resilience...
I lied.
I think that's
I lied to them, I lied to myself. But I mean, the thing about being on tour, all the stories of sex and drugs and all the rest of it are true. But only up to a point. There's no way you could survive, 100 dates going around the world. You just couldn't survive. Particularly when you're doing places like America, where they think nothing of a 500-mile drive between gigs. You know, in Britain, you drive 100 miles and everyone's wimping out. You know, it's a long fucking drive. Oh, I'll be tired. Fuck off.
Birmingham to Manchester.
In America, you go there. First of all, they call going to route a tour in America is to route. They call it route. Hey, we worked out your route yet? Route. I mean, a route's a completely different thing in Scotland. But so suddenly, I mean, I remember the first time we did a half-decent tour. I never really did a massive tour of America. Proper tour of America is about 100 dates, but biggest tour I've ever done in America is maybe about 40, 50 dates. And I'm looking at the dates, and we're playing 5-6 nights on the trot, and there were 500 miles on several occasions between gigs. I said, it's impossible, we can't do it. What are you fucking wimps, you fucking limeys, you know, you Scottish, you know, come on.
This was Simple Minds?
This was a Simple Minds.
Stadium stuff?
No, it's fucking places like this. You know, we're doing gigs. Great places, actually. I mean, to be honest, I'll tell you one thing. People often say, the best time of my life was my record shop days, as you could tell from the earlier, but I loved that. That's the thing I'm kind of most proud of. But the best days with Simple Minds was before we broke, and we were out there pioneering and doing venues like this, complete unknown territory, and arriving in a town, you know, not knowing what to expect, and places are rough, and you're nervous as well. But the excitement and the joy of doing these gigs, and on a good night, the band were, believe it or not, Simple Minds really were a fantastic band, and they had a great work ethic, and they were really cool, particularly in those days. And that first tour, the Sons and Fascination tour we did of America.
So, I mean, never mind Jim Kerr walking around Glasgow with makeup on. I mean, what was it like in some of these southern states in America?
Oh, the southern states is a different ballgame. In fact, there was one we had to cancel it. Jim, the one thing, even a band like Simple Minds, who were all kind of super cool in those days, you still got the girls coming backstage, you know? And there was this one girl came backstage with her boyfriend, and they sort of fell out. And that's fine. And the boy pissed off, and Jim saw the girl home, or back to the hotel, in fact. And as they're going into the hotel, this guy jumped on them and jumped on the girl, in fact, and slapped the girl, said, "You cow, you bitch," or something. So Jim jumped on him and beat the absolute shit out of him. I mean, I don't know why he weren't arrested. He should have gone to jail. I mean, the guy was hospitalised. And, I mean, the guy had a bit of a go at Jim as well, and Jim broke Jim's nose, so I had to cancel the next night's gig. So Jim, for all the makeup and his sort of poofy look, was a wee hard man. I came for the Gorbals, man, you know. He didn't fucking mess with me. But so there were odd moments where silly things happened. You know, you get into the odd fight or something. But generally speaking, we were hard-working, and you lived hard. You burnt the candle at both ends for sure. But the amount of drink and drugs that were supposedly consumed by bands is just... I'll tell you what happens. You die. And that's why there are deaths. And it is why bands do collapse and finish, because they're fun. And I know too many bands that haven't even made it and they're doing that. And I just think, you know, you're going to grow up. You know, don't drink before you go on stage. It's rock and roll, man. It's not rock and roll, it's drink. No, that's rock and roll. You know, that's drink. Give it to me. I've always said that. Leave all your drugs, all the drink, with the manager. I'll look after it for you. See you later.
I think this is probably a good time to get the very clean living Ally McCrae on the stage. Yeah. Where is Ally? Oh, there he is. Excellent. How could I have missed you? A round of applause for Ally.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Have we got a microphone for Ally?
Right, before we go any further, how on earth do I follow that? Nicola, who basically single-handedly invented happy hardcore, and Bruce, I was between wives, Findlay. Just how on earth does a man follow that? The last crazy thing I did was get kicked in the face by a crowd surfer. That's me, I'm done.
Oh, really? Where was that?
Tuesday night.
Right.
I was late for the gig and I promised I'd be there, and I think it was malicious, but fair enough.
What, was the crowd surfer the one you were late for? Was this your date or something?
No. Nah.
You're the youngest person on this panel. I mean, I kind of deliberately did this as a generational. It's
I wore my hoodie on purpose.
It's good.
I was late because I was smashing windows.
Excellent.
Stuff like that.
Did you tag anything on your way and stuff? Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. So you got like a chronological xylophone here, although kind of the other way around
What's happening
in terms of height. Yeah. I'm kind of like I'm just the glue that holds it all together. Yeah?
Lovely.
So Ally, I first met you at a Born to Be Wide night, if I'm not mistaken. Was it the German night? About 3 years ago.
I was there.
Video evidence of this, yeah. And I think in those days it was even pre-Detour. I think this is when you were still at Stirling. I mean, how did you end up going from university to being on the radio?
A big, lanky, lucky bastard, basically. I like the Stirling connection here as well, by the way. Stirling born, Stirling record company, record shop. Stirling, first place I got my hole. That's a good connection. There you go, Stirling, if you want to work in the music industry. There you are.
Go to Stirling, yeah. Is anyone else from Stirling in this room? Oh, wow, excellent. There's one more and we've got a conspiracy, yeah?
Nobody else is admitting to it, no.
No bands from
Funny,
Stirling.
I did the first thing I ever did on radio, the thing that led me to get to work on Radio 1 was I was lucky enough to do a wee part on Vic's show, which was called the Student Radio Takeover, and we did 3, and then I was out of Stirling bands. That was it. I was humped. My radio career was up the Swanee as soon as it had begun.
I promoted the Humble Bums in Stirling Town Hall. There you go.
Good man, I should have been there.
It was good.
Good man.
Billy Connolly came on stage and said, "We're the Humble Bums. My name's Humble." That was the beginning of his career as a comedian. He's the bum, in other words, But anyway, yeah.
So his comedy was better than his music, or was that when he was just starting?
No, his comedy was pretty shit then, but it was the beginning. He had to have a funny quip between every single song, and gradually these quips became longer and longer. And Billy Connolly wasn't too bad actually. He could play a wee bit of banjo, and he had a kind of wistful sort of hey voice. And Jerry, of course, was a musical genius. And they were really quite an odd couple. There was a wee touch of the Lennon McCartneys about them, but Billy Connolly was no John Lennon. But Jerry Rafferty was certainly like Paul McCartney.
So sadly, when I was doing the Student Radio Takeover, that part wasn't happening.
No.
But loads going on, obviously, and that was the first time I was allowed on the radio. I'd been running the student radio station in Stirling for a couple of years, and nobody else wanted to do it. Muslim, who is now my producer at the BBC, he basically said, look, he told me today actually that the reason he did it was because he convinced Radio 1 down south that there wasn't enough opportunities. He would go out and do talks to all these media courses, he would go out to student radio stations, but none of them were getting anywhere close to an actual radio station. So he said, right, I want to give 7 minutes of a 2-hour weekly show to the students. And, I owe my
Were you actually studying broadcasting?
Started off studying philosophy. Load of shite. Just wanted an answer out of anything, and I just couldn't hack it anymore. So I transferred over to media, but sorry if there's anyone from the University of Stirling here. My course had nothing to do with me getting a job. It was the opportunity, lucky enough, thanks to my parents, to be at university. I then got involved with a student radio station. It was all the people I met through that. that led me to working in the music industry.
Has everyone heard of Detour here, or do you know what? Who doesn't know? It's okay to admit it because
it's okay. In fact, I'd rather because I can sell it to you then.
Detour
Good man.
is. Why don't you explain it? I mean, this is what I almost pissed myself laughing watching this recently. I mean, Ali's doing an interview with a guy that starts lifting weights, and by the end of it, this guy's lifting fridges in his backyard.
I ended up in hospital because of that interview. Straight up, 2 days later. But Detour is basically we started off, me and my best pal David Weaver, whose name is conveniently tattooed on my arm. It's how much he's my bro, right there. Courier New 10 point. David Weaver. Font. Yeah, it's a good font. Nice. I thought about Comic Sans. Come on, have a bit of class, McCrae. Like, get that one. So David Weaver, best pal at university. We ran the student radio station together. We did a really aptly named new music show called Air 3's New Music Show, and hung out, went to gigs, got free tickets, met famous bands. He interviewed Jason Donovan. That was his highlight. Pretty good, eh? I couldn't match that. Got Frank Turner in the studio. Wasn't as cool as Jason Donovan. So we did that, and then obviously, luckily enough, we both somehow passed university, got through, graduated. Shit. No free tickets to anything. And the show had all been about championing new music and getting these bands in session, like Twin Atlantic, who are now kind of famous. They came in and did their first ever radio session on Air 3 on my show, which is, to me at the time, I was so happy to get them. Now I look back on it, and they've played on Radio 1, they've done Red and Leeds, Tea in the Park, main stage, and
they'll be so happy that they came on your show.
So happy. Do you know what?
Ali, did you record these shows?
Yes, we did. It's still on YouTube.
CDs or copies?
Still on YouTube, aye. But Craig, the drummer, didn't want to come on at all. He was like, "We sound shite acoustic. We sound terrible." And now they've been doing live lounge sessions for Ferg Cotton, and he wasn't saying it there, was he?
There should be more student radio, don't you think?
As much as is humanly possible, because it's a breeding ground.
Student radio in America is what broke Simple Minds in America. It wasn't mainstream radio.
Uh-huh.
And mainstream radio here is shit. I mean, apart from we're lucky with BBC Scotland, and we shouldn't complain too much about the beat, because we're fucking lucky. We've got people like Ali and Vic. Commercial radio is shite, and the music format is shite. It'll never break a new band. But fresh air and college radio, these kind of things really should be the breeding ground for any young aspiring bands. Don't feel snobby about going on college radio.
Not at all.
It probably will be your first break on radio, and it's a fabulous experience.
Well, I went to CMJ, the festival in New York, just in October there, and that is a festival I didn't even know until I got there, which is about college radio. It's the biggest artist going there. I sat and watched a talk with Young Guru, who's like Jay-Z's right-hand man. And this is, students interviewing him and students hanging out with him. And to see that in comparison to UK student radio is just mind-boggling. And they really do break artists. And even in a smaller scale, if you look at it in the UK, that is a stepping stone. If you go in there, that's your place. You can go and do an interview. You can go make a mistake. You can go be nervous. You can get that over with until the bigger guns come and go, oh yeah, we'll get you for a session. And it's a breeding ground, and it's phenomenal.
So did you just decide to move to Glasgow then, and did you figure that was the best place to be?
Well, I'm from Paisley,
a
place called Neilston, just up the road from Paisley. And I basically moved back home and thought, back to Glasgow, that's where music is. Was working full-time in a restaurant, and the rest of the time I was a full-time bevy merchant, so just in the pub, putting on gigs. And,
only the job's changed, yeah?
Exactly, yeah, pretty much.
Excellent.
But yeah, Glasgow is, for me, the epicenter of everything. It's where all my connections are, where all the people I knew was.
But I mean, when you started Detour, the whole concept of kidnapping bands and things, that was, no one else was doing that. How did you come up with those ideas?
Well, basically, it was more out of, I think my dad years ago, when I was still leaving school, bought me a PR book, and he said, there's 2 things you need to remember. See, if you read the business section of the newspaper, that's where you get the news about 2-3 months before it hits the front pages. The other side was, he was a historian. This gets a bit convoluted. He was a historian, but he said, everything is about how you are seen. So he gave me this PR book. It was, my first PR, you know. And he's a bit of a socialist, but he still said, this is, you know, if you're going into this industry, this is how you need to be. It's all about how you're seen and how people perceive you, and the sort of things you do are, you know, what will get you a job, basically.
I'm loving the transition from that to going to study philosophy.
Exactly. And do you know why I really studied philosophy? I had a teacher in my high school in Eastwood High, and he was really, really cool. One of those teachers that was like lending you CDs. He burnt Radiohead The Bends onto CD for me, and I burnt him in exchange Biffy Clyro, Vertigo of Bliss. He was like, this is the business. And his story was amazing. And he had basically, so he says, he'd left school at like 15 and gone and done a load of jobs, got drunk, been in bands. And then one day, he said he was 27 years old and he was picking up rubbish at the side of the M8. And he just went, nah, can't be doing with this anymore. And somehow that led him to do a philosophy degree at Stirling. Then he became my English teacher. I don't know about the accuracy of Mr. Collins' story there, but that was cool as hell to me at 16. I was like, no way, going to Stirling Uni. Not quite that clear cut, but I applied for it, didn't get into Glasgow, and then I was just turning 18 and didn't get into Glasgow. All my mates were staying in Glasgow. I was like, nah, I don't want to go. And then I ended up going to Stirling because I had no other option. My dad egged me on. And I didn't regret it at all. It was.
So when you started Detour, I guess, what were the first things that you did? I mean, how did you pull those together with the band Kidnaps?
Well, the first thing we did was we wanted to put a gig on because we were just like, look, we've been doing all these shows, we've met all these bands. So we got, we tried a couple of venues saying, would you give us some money to put on some bands? And one of them, Bar Block, was like, aye, definitely. So we booked a gig and we thought, right, how are we going to get people to this gig? Nobody knows who we are. So we had a couple of pals. One of them, who's right over there, filming right now, Ben, who we owe absolutely everything to. We convinced Ben to come out and film a band, Bronto Skylift, who involved one half of the Phantom Band's drummer, Ian, who is Weaver on the arm. That's his cousin. So there's always a connection. And basically, I was like, right, I've got this idea. Let's just pure kidnap a band. Don't tell them where they're going, and we'll go and film it, and it'll be a session. It'll be like Pitchfork. It'll be amazing. It'll be great. And it was a Friday night, and we thought, where do we do it? The only sensible place to do it is Stirling. That's where me and Weaver met. You know, we thought it's great. It's the epicentre of Scottish music, obviously. Yeah, it's where I first got my whole. Thought perfect, right? It's ideal, right? And there's this lovely bit, I don't know if you know Stirling, there's a lovely set of cannons which overlook, like you can see the Wallace Monument that way, you can see Stirling Castle that way, and thought, that's it. Imagine Bronto Skylift, a hardcore two-piece up there. So, absolutely, giving it heaps. So we hired a generator, number one, to power the amp. We got a couple of pals roped in. Ben regrets it ever since, don't you, Ben? Absolutely. Look at him. It's why? A couple of pals that did sound at college, and we thought, right, let's all do this. We'll be a team. We'll go do this, and we'll get to the pub, have a couple of beers. It'll be great. So the grand plan was hatched. We had like about 5 guys to carry the gear up this hill to the cannons, and we got there about 5 o'clock, and it was heaving it down. No way we could possibly do it. So we ended up having to go to this half-built bridge in Stirling, which is next to the railway station. And we did it under there, and it basically looked like we'd just taken the band to a really crap car park, which we had, basically. And they were like, dude, like, because they were on the rise, you know, they were going to play Tea in the Park that summer, and, you know, it was looking good for them. And we convinced them, you know, thinking, this is a big time, we'll nail it. But we got the video nailed, got it edited up, got it out. People came to the show. Ian, the drummer, played on the table, and there's this photo we've used in pretty much every piece of publicity ever since. Him on the table, people being sick in each other, chucking stuff. Wild. It was crazy. It was punk. It was, people hadn't really seen gigs like that in a while.
I mean, who was able to operate a generator? I mean, did you just kind of read up about it online, or did it come with instructions?
That was Weaver. I think he just gallantly walked up to the HSS hire company and said, "Right, need a big Jenny there. Thanks very much. Right, 28 kilowatt, smashing. Got it. Pulled the cord and hope for the best. It was good." It's pretty much the ethos behind it.
And I mean, you've gone on to have gigs in toilets on Arthur's.
The dizzying heights of
absolutely the toilet gig. Yeah, I mean, really, and quite literally. Did you not do Arthur's Seat as something on Arthur's Seat as well?
We did that. Kind of evolved, and it became a kind of community block of people hanging out and going, "Oh, why don't you do that?" I smash an idea when you're steaming at 3 a.m. Then the next day you're like, "Yeah, I've got to do that now."
Have you ever been arrested?
No. To my sadness, because that would have been amazing PR. See if I'd been lifted, like, if I got lifted, hey, great chat. What am I going to say when I'm sitting in a chair later on? No stories.
Have you ever been arrested, Bruce, other than for selling counterculture magazines?
No, I'm trying to think. I think we're always able to run too fast.
What about you, Nicola?
Oh yeah, I'll tell you. Yes, there was one time. Adelaide, Australia. Great gig. And one of the roadies said, I'm going outside. I'm meeting a guy in the car park. I said, what for? He said, getting a wee bit of Gally What's It. I said, you're not going for the Gally What's It. I will go. I'm not risking you.
Is that what you called bumming in those days?
Yeah, it could be. He was a bit of an arse. But anyway, I go out to the car park. I knew the guy he was getting this stuff from. He was a Scots guy living in Australia. So I go into the car and I sit in the car. I give him $100. He gives me a wee packet of stuff, and there's a on the window. And I look, and there's a policeman going like this. And he picked it up, and I've got this stuff in my hand. I throw it back at him, and I get out, and the guy searches me, and I've still got about $100 on me. I put it back. I said, "That's quite a lot of cash." I said, "I'm managing a band. We're on tour." He said, "What was that you just threw at him?" I said, "I don't know. He just handed it to me." It looked like tea. I said, "It could be cannabis, but what do I know?" And the guy's looking at me. So, and of course, there's another cop at the other side taking this other guy away. And he talks to me for a while. And I said, "Look," he said, "Have you ever smoked drugs?" And I said, "Yeah, of course. Smoked a joint, things, but I wouldn't be doing anything like that. My band are on tour. I mean, we've got an international reputation. I wouldn't put their reputation at stake for a wee bit of grass." And the next thing is there's a scream from the bushes. I mean, a real scream. I mean, it was worse than the one next door there just now, you know. I said, "Somebody's getting raped." And I rushed over to the bushes. And the policeman's after me, "Right, come back here," you know, like this. And I said, we couldn't find anything in the bushes. And I said, "Look, forget what was going on back there. That's nothing, you know. Somebody could be getting hurt here." And we couldn't find anything. Back to the car. And I just talked and talked and talked. And the next thing is, it'd been so long, the band are leaving. And they're driving past and they're waving at me, talking to the police. "There's Bruce helping the police. He's awfully good that way, you know." "Good on you, Bruce," you know. And they're away back. And I talked my way out of it. They let me go. And I walked back. We had hired apartments to live in, and I got back to the apartment. And the guys were all, well, they were actually all shagging, as it happens, because I was dying to tell them. I just talked my way out of a bloody bust, man. The other guy got done. But fortunately, he got done for possession, not for dealing. He'd already been done before. And so his story corroborated. I mean, I corroborated his story. Luckily. But yes, that was the nearest thing to being bust. And it was a wee bit terrifying, to be honest, because I was so strict with the band about taking drugs or doing drugs or going anywhere near police or crossing borders and things like that. Just don't do it, guys. It's bad news. You know, and there was me about to
do
lose
as I say, not as I do.
But I didn't. But the thing is, you said, "Did it ever get done?" No, but that was the nearest. But no.
What about you, Nicola? I mean, if Nick Cave is telling you to calm down, I mean, what exactly were you doing?
I've not actually been I don't have a criminal record. I'm clean, right? Yeah. But I have been, you know, like lifted quite a few times for things, but. Like stealing a moped or like not harming people. I remember a couple of the bad seeds once in Notting Hill. I can't quite remember what happened, but there was a Greek restaurant and we got taken away by the police. But it was fine. It was all fine. But when we got out of the car, I remember just thinking that was just too easy to talk ourselves out of that. So when I got out of the car, I remember thinking I've been sitting on a bulletproof vest, so I tried to steal it. So then I did get arrested. But the guy who arrested me was from Crieff. And he gave me his number and let me go, and his number was on the back of his own wedding invitation. So it was never any harm, no harm. I'm very, but yeah, there were like there were quite a lot. And Portugal, I'm not that welcoming, but because of a few things. Not so welcome in Portugal. Just absinthe and related, a scaffolding. Moby had got into this kind of like tete-a-tete with, what was that woman called who was in Neighbours? Holly Valance. Oh. Right, yeah. He on live on Portuguese telly said that Holly Valance had told him backstage that she thought Kylie Minogue was shit, which was a total lie, but it was live on air, and so Holly Valance had taken a massive, obviously, offence to this. And we'd taken refuge in an Irish pub, and then, I think he thought her men were after him, sort of thing. So there was a scaffolding, and then there was climbing, mainly climbing. Not so much drugs, just climbing. So yeah, run-ins, but, totally. I'm like, my record is impeccable. My criminal one, that is,
And you've got Ally, you've still got to be arranged for you, yeah.
Well, Holly Valance was a large part of my upbringing, so I'm quite appalled to hear that. My boy's at a certain age, and he,
That was probably when.
Yeah. Fucking Moby. Square go right now.
Maybe there's an argument for, like, if you're happy to kind of perpetuate that thing, there's maybe an argument for the sort of novelty angle, maybe being a bit more risky. Like, when I was doing the happy hardcore thing, I also worked with a band called the Out Here Brothers, who, yeah, that was the first band I took to Top of the Pops, and they were like, they basically spent their entire career was based on being a metaphor for, well, anal sex, basically, It was like, they had several #1 hits with that. Everything about them was a shrouded sexual reference. I took them to Top of the Pops when I was like 19, maybe 20, and it was like horrifying, scarred me for life. Like 15. It was fucking amazing. Yeah, totally, yeah. But the thing with them was they absolutely, their audience loved them because they thought they were risky. They were actually quite puerile. It actually wasn't that bad, really.
These sound great. They totally passed me by, yeah.
The Out Here Brothers, really. Boom, boom, boom. Let me hear you say, "Ayo." Oh, good. That's where we sold all the records. That's what I was going to say. Tell you what, you'll make a lot of money just throwing a few kind of sex jives and you're fine, Yeah. Music.
That's the publicity sorted out. Have you got any good tunes?
That was my next question.
A good. I'll tell you. A good song wins every time.